What's up, everybody? Chris Pennell here. We're going over my quarterback tier rankings for week 8 of the fantasy football season. If you do enjoy today's video, make sure you leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. If you have any questions, comments, concerns about anything I say or your own personal teams, leave them down below. I'm more than happy to answer you. All right, so let's get right into it. We're going to start with our S tier. We have 4 of them this week. And number 1, it should be no surprise, similar to last week, but it's Patrick Mahomes facing the Denver Broncos. Another cakewalk matchup. Had one last week, and he delivered over 400 passing yards, multiple passing touchdowns, well over 30 fantasy points. And while I can't expect him to get over 400 yards and like 3 touchdowns again, it's certainly possible versus the Denver Broncos. They're currently allowing the 4th most points per game at the quarterback position, 270 passing yards and 2.3 passing touchdowns. The Chiefs currently own the 3rd highest implied team total of the week, only behind the Miami Dolphins and the Los Angeles Chargers. 27-point implied team total on the road in Mile High. They're still 7.5-point favorites. This game does feature a 46.5-point over-under. I really hope the Broncos can keep this game close. If they do, because Patrick Mahomes, if he's throwing the rest of the game and they can get to 40 passing attempts, which he's averaging right around 36 per game, I'm assuming they're going to be leading, but if it's not an absolute blowout, it should be another smash spot for Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, you're starting him. I'm just giving you the confidence that, hey, you probably have the QB1 on the week. Coming in at number 2, he is a floor matched by no other quarterback, but it's Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles facing off versus the Washington Commanders. A little bit of a lower implied team total here of 25, but it's a really soft matchup versus the Commanders, currently allowing the 3rd most points per game at the quarterback position, over 260 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, and over 30 yards on the ground to quarterbacks, which is perfect for Jalen Hurts. He's currently averaging nearly 8 designed runs per game, 0.9 rushing touchdowns, 40 rushing yards. So if you just take in what he does on the ground per game on average, that is 10 points on the ground. And that's not even starting with what he can do through the air, which is right around 260 passing yards per game and 1.3 passing touchdowns. So yeah, the floor is unmatched here, because even if he has a bad day through the air, what he can do on the ground is just incredible. So floor is really high, the ceiling's really high. Perfect spot versus the Commanders. So feel confident having him in your lineup, even though he did pop up on the injury report, but it should be nothing to be concerned about. And we continue the good matchups here. Now, usually number 3 is reserved for Josh Allen. It's typically just these big 3 because they're a tier above the rest. But after last week's performance, Lamar Jackson, since he got this matchup versus the Arizona Cardinals, who are allowing the 5th most points per game of the position, I think he belongs in the number 3 spot this week, because his rushing upside is pretty much the same as Jalen Hurts. Doesn't score quite as much, but he's right there with them. So he's averaging 50 rushing yards per game, close to 6 designed runs, that's not including scrambles, and over 0.7 rushing touchdowns. So he gets more yards, just doesn't score quite as often, but touchdowns can be a bit fluky. I wouldn't say they're fluky with Jalen Hurts. It's just what that offense is designed for. But this is a great spot versus the Cardinals. 260 passing yards per game, over 20 fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position. 26.25 implied team total. They're on the road in Arizona, 8.5-point favorites. They don't have to worry about any weather. They are playing in the dome. Should be another great spot for Lamar Jackson. And then running out the S tier, Josh Allen. And he too does possess some rushing upside. And it's actually not as much as you'd think this year. I know we typically think of Josh Allen, a guy that can get you 40, 50 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown, but you can certainly score. If they get around the goal line, I mean, it would be no shock if Josh Allen just takes it in. Is averaging close to 0.6 rushing touchdowns per game this year. But we're only talking 1.5 designed runs, which I don't love because it does hurt his value. He can still scramble, obviously, but he's only getting 21 rushing yards per game. And if you think about it, that's less than Patrick Mahomes. And we don't really view Patrick Mahomes as a rushing quarterback, but honestly, so far this season, he's kind of had some sneaky rushing upside. 30.5 rushing yards per game for Mahomes and 1.7 designed runs. He's actually been scrambling quite well so far this year. And the matchup is not as good for Josh Allen versus the Buccaneers. It's not a bad matchup. They're bottom half in the league versus quarterbacks, allowing 260 passing yards per game. It's just not quite the cakewalk these other 3 get. So still have a lot of confidence in Josh Allen. I just think he's number 4 this week. All right, so moving on to the A tier, we only have 3 guys that made the cut this week. And really, after like the big 4, and then plus just a few guys that happen to find themselves in good matchups, or guys just like we're about to talk about, I don't want to spoil it, there's just a big drop off in performance. So if you don't have these guys, it's just not been fun this year, unless you get lucky with your streamers each week, which there's been a couple of stragglers for sure, but it does seem like there's quite a bit of a drop off. But starting us off in the A tier, I wouldn't say it's my favorite matchup in the world. It's Tua for the Miami Dolphins. They currently own the highest implied team total of the week at 28.25, highest over under the week as well at 47. They are 9.5-point favorites. They're playing at home, playing the New England Patriots, who only allow the 7th fewest points a game at the quarterback position. But I'm not going to be too concerned about that, just because I think this offense can overpower just about everybody. And I realized it was a pretty down week for the Miami Dolphins versus the Philadelphia Eagles. I believe Tua was in the low 200s for passing yards. But still in the season, he's averaging right around 300, over 2 passing touchdowns, 9.1 yards per attempt. 71% completion percentage. And you have arguably the best wide receiver duo in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle out there. And Tyreek Hill has just been absolutely annihilating defenses so far this year. And Tua does have the highest QBR right now at 110.4. So while it's kind of a sloppy matchup versus the New England Patriots, I just hate New England games in general because they're just so gross. But they're playing at home. This offense is way too good to be stopped. So I think Tua certainly belongs in that A tier. And I do have him as a top 5 quarterback option this week, although it's very close between these two. I have Justin Herbert next at number 6. If you want to flip-flop them, I'm totally fine with it, but I highly doubt you have both on your roster, so just play whichever one you got. But Herbert finds himself in a great spot versus the Chicago Bears, and they're playing at home in the Dome, so no weather to worry about. And I do prefer the Chargers playing at home. They're 8.5-point favorites. Very similar spot to Dolphins in terms of their Vegas implied totals. 27.5, 8.5-point favorites, 46.5 over-under, so that's the second highest of the week. Herbert's got 265 passing yards per game, 1.6 passing touchdowns, and the Bears are currently allowing nearly 270 yards per game on 2 passing touchdowns. And that's currently ranking 24th versus the positions. No shortage of weapons here. You have Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler at the backfield. Whatever tight end he wants to throw to, whether it be Gerald Everett, Donald Parham. Joshua Palmer's also shown some upside so far this year, over 100 yards last week. And Quentin Johnson, I guess he's just not going to be a thing in that offense. But if he ever does play, there's another weapon for Justin Herbert. But I do like him, and I would feel very confident if I had him in my lineups this week. And then maybe a surprise visit in the A tier this week, but I think he kind of deserves it. He's been playing some pretty good football this season. Jared Goff, he's going to finish our A tier here, but the Lions find themselves in a pretty good spot versus the Las Vegas Raiders at home in prime time. 26.5 implied team total, 8.5-point favorites. Honestly, all these quarterbacks are in very similar situations where they find themselves in pretty decent spots. Not the best matchups in the world, but definitely favorable. And they all have right around a 26-point implied team total, and they are favorites playing at home, so it makes sense that they're all pretty similar as far as projections and rankings are concerned. And Goff, no shortage of weapons here. Jahmyr Gibbs out of the backfield, Sam Laporta, one of the better tight ends in football. Amon-Ra St. Brown is a machine out there. And then you have a bunch of nice complementary pieces, whether it be Josh Reynolds, Jameson Williams, maybe even Marvin Jones out there. But yeah, I definitely think Jared Goff is a QB1 this week that you can start with full confidence. And moving down to the B tier, this is where it kind of gets a bit ugly, and it feels like everybody's just the same play, and there's really not that much differentiating everybody from each other. But we're going to kick it off with the Dallas Cowboys, Dak Prescott, and they actually have a pretty decent implied team total this week. They're playing at home versus the Rams, 26-point implied team total. They're 6.5-point favorites. While this has definitely not been a great season for Dak Prescott so far, kind of got back on track versus the Chargers a couple weeks ago before the bye week. And the matchup this week versus the Rams, it's so-so. They're 17th versus quarterbacks right now, only allowing 220 passing yards per game and 0.57 passing touchdowns. That seems like something that's probably going to start rising as the season progresses. So I'm fine with Dak here. Him and CeeDee Lamb should be fine. You have Jake Ferguson, Michael Gallup, a decent amount of weapons there, even Tony Pollard out of the backfield. It's not like I'm over the moon excited about Dak Prescott this week, but as you're going to see, we run out of options pretty quick. So if you don't have anybody in the S and A tier, it just feels a little shaky this week. Next for me, Brock Purdy of the San Francisco 49ers. If you watch the Monday night game, well, you probably have a little bit less confidence in Purdy than you came into heading to the weekend because, yeah, it wasn't great. Couple of bad picks, one there at the end to try to march down the field and win the game. Obviously did not happen. While it does suck that Deebo Samuel is going to be out once again, hopefully the 49ers can get back on track playing at home. They have been on the road the prior 2 weeks, and we still have a nice 25.5 implied team total. And while the Bengals aren't exactly the best matchup in the world, 13 fewest points for you in the quarterback position, we're just running out of good teams, and when I can get a quarterback on a good offense that's expected to put up points, hopefully it's not just a bunch of CMC rushing touchdowns, and then we'll be fine. Like all we need is like 250 and 2, and that'll be a very viable quarterback this week. And rounding out our top 10, we have Trevor Lawrence of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And while this isn't my favorite spot, it's kind of just right down the middle of the road here versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. 18th versus quarterbacks, allowing roughly 260 passing yards per game and 1.3 passing touchdowns. Lawrence hasn't exactly been great this year. We're on the road in Pittsburgh, which isn't my favorite. Only 235 passing yards per game this season. What I do like is that he actually ran the ball a bit on Thursday night versus the New Orleans Saints, which was a bit of a surprise coming in because he was dealing with a knee injury. But that now puts him on the season averaging right around 30 rushing yards per game. So it's a nice little floor we built in for Trevor Lawrence. And he has great weapons, obviously, in Calvin Ridley, even though he doesn't really look his way too often, it seems like. Christian Kirk's been very consistent this season. You have Evan Ingram out there, Jamal Agnew, and whoever else they want to put out there, Travis Etienne out of the backfield. So Lawrence, while he is not the most exciting play, and I thought he'd be higher in our rankings at this point of the season, he's still in that QB1 status, more so in the low end range. Up next, we have the rookie out of Ohio State, CJ Stroud, who's been playing great football this year. Now, the completion percentage, something a little bit to be less desired, below 60%, but he's still not turning the ball over. Roughly around 280 passing yards per game, 1.5 passing touchdowns. Pretty soft matchup here versus the Carolina Panthers. Now, the run defense has been a little bit more favorable this season versus the pass. Pretty much middle of the pack, 17 points per game, 15th versus quarterbacks, and 214 passing yards per game. But the way this Houston Texans offense operates, there should be plenty of opportunity for CJ Stroud, Tank Dell, Nico Collins to be able to eat here. They are coming in as 3-point favorites on the road in Carolina, 23-point implied team total with a 43-point over-under. As long as the yards are there and hopefully the touchdowns come with it, CJ Stroud is in the low-end QB1 range this week in 12-team leagues. And then probably someone that you're surprised hasn't shown up yet, we have Joe Burrow on the back end of the B tier. Now, obviously, he could end up rising, but this is a pretty tough matchup on the road in San Francisco. They're allowing less than 14 points per game at the quarterback position, which is third fewest on the season, 238 passing yards. And we're still not really sure if we have the good Joe Burrow back yet or not. We saw the explosion game versus the Arizona Cardinals. Wasn't that great versus the Seattle Seahawks, only averaging 205 passing yards per game on 35 passing attempts, and abysmal. And I mean abysmal. This is the worst on the entire slate that I'm looking at. 5.3 yards per attempt for Joe Burrow this season on a 63% completion percentage. He's got great weapons in Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. It just hasn't really added up to too much this season with his nagging injury. So he's still startable. He's in the back end of the QB1 range, but it's not the Joe Burrow that we expect, where he's usually hovering around that S and A tier range. Moving on to the C tier, this is the range where you really hope that you don't have to start these guys, but if you're in a bad situation like I am in my leagues, well, you might just end up having to do it. So kicking off the C tier, someone that balled out once again in primetime. I'm telling you guys, Kirk Cousins is not a bad primetime quarterback. He's been putting up numbers the past several primetime games now. And while he did get a bit lucky, because that ball probably should have got picked off, Jordan Addison did turn it into a 60-yard touchdown. All counts the same in fantasy to me. I think he got one owed back because the one he did throw to Addison early in the game, that was a slant, probably should have been a catch. He just kind of got out-bullied, but ended up getting redemption there. But Kirk Cousins here for the Minnesota Vikings on the road in Green Bay. If this game was at home, I'd probably put him in the B tier, but I do prefer Kirk Cousins and the Vikings offense playing at home in the Dome. But on the year, Kirk Cousins has put up excellent numbers. Now, the majority of this is with Justin Jefferson. When you take the best wide receiver in the game off the field, it's definitely going to hurt your upside, but it didn't slow him down last night. 295 passing yards per game, 2.3 passing touchdowns, throwing the ball a ton, more than any other team in the league, right around 38 times per game this season, just below a 70% completion percentage. Green Bay is allowing the 9th fewest points in the quarterback position, and with this being on the road, again, I'm not excited about it. That's why he's in the C tier this week, but he still has fine weapons in Jordan Addison, who the rookie, he showed his upside. I mean, we saw the upside in flashes with Justin Jefferson playing, but now that he's out and he's the alpha dog now, I mean, he definitely showed that he can support that role. Brandon Powell's not terrible. KJ Osborne, one of the best tight ends in football. TJ Hawkinson, even though he's out there faking leg injuries now. His coach told him, but they got caught. At number 14, this is a guy that is a borderline QB1 in certain matchups. This week, it's not the greatest spot here on the road versus Dallas. Only a 19.5 implied team total here. They are 6.5-point dogs, so they should be throwing the ball in this one. And Stafford has been able to get the yards this season, just not really getting the passing touchdowns. 275 passing yards per game, but he has one of the best duos as a wide receiver in the league with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, and that's going to keep him viable most weeks, but the matchup looking really rough here. Dallas is allowing less than 200 passing yards per game to the quarterback position, so I would have my expectations on Matthew Stafford this week decently low. And continuing the trend of quarterbacks that are startable in the right matchups, but this week they find themselves in a really tough spot. We have Geno Smith of the Seattle Seahawks, and he gets to face off versus the Cleveland Browns defense, who I know just got shredded by Gardner Minshew, but still overall they've been a really tough defense this season, still allowing the 7th fewest points per game at the quarterback position, only 170 passing yards, which is the least of any team so far this season. We're not sure if DK Metcalf's going to play or not. If he happens to be out, that hurts his upside even more. Hopefully you don't have to start Geno this week and you have better options, but if not, there is at least a 21.75 implied team total to look forward to. Then the flip side of this game, we do not know if he's going to be healthy or not. I know last week he only got 5 pass attempts in before he got ruled out. He was getting tested for a concussion. He cleared that, but they didn't want to bring him in because they need to evaluate his arm even more, because the few passes he did in that game obviously weren't too pretty. Could have had 2 picks easily. One got overturned. And Seattle so far this season, they've been a pretty easy pass defense, but so is Indy. It's a very limited sample size. We saw with Deshaun Watson, so I don't want to put anything too much onto him. But Seattle is 23rd versus quarterbacks, allowing nearly 260 passing yards per game. So if he does start, he's at least playable, because we know the upside is there. Because honestly, if Watson's fully healthy and he plays like he used to, I mean, you could put him right there in the A tier, but obviously we haven't seen that from him yet, so you can't do it. But there's rushing upside with Watson, averaging around 20 rushing yards per game, although starting last week, they kind of kill that a bit. It's more so right around 30 in full games this season. But only an 18-point implied team total for the Browns here. Not sure if he's going to play or not, but if he does, he's at least viable as a wild card. And he could honestly range anywhere from the A to C tier. It just depends on what kind of Deshaun Watson we get this week. Then we're going to go to the D tier. If you have to start these guys, you can probably just chalk it up as a loss because, well, you have some really bad things going on for your teams. But I get it. If you're in a pinch, sometimes you're forced to do things that you don't want to do. Number one for me is going to be Derek Carr, and he gets the face off versus a pretty easy defense here, the Indianapolis Colts. They currently rank 20th versus the quarterback position, allowing over 250 passing yards per game. And Derek Carr is capable of having a good game. We saw last week on Thursday night versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, put up over 20 fantasy points on the season, 230 passing yards per game. Less than one passing touchdown, though, but they do pass the ball quite a bit at nearly 34 times per game. Now, about half of those are dump-offs to Alvin Kamara, but hey, they all add up the same. But as you can tell, the yards per attempt is obviously going to be pretty low as it's in the low sixes this year. So hopefully you don't have to play Derek Carr, but at least it's a favorable matchup. Same can be said for Jordan Love. He is just not good at football. I mean, 57% completion percentage, near the top of the list in bad throw percentages. But he does get touchdowns for some reason. Now, I know touchdowns are the least projectable stat there is out there. But on the season, 210 passing yards per game, which is not good. But 1.67 passing touchdown, which has kept them afloat, but it's not something you can count on. But it is a favorable matchup. Minnesota is 21st versus quarterbacks this season. Then we have Sam Howell of the Washington Commanders facing off versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Another pretty good spot here. They're also 21st versus quarterbacks, allowing close to 2 passing touchdowns per game, and not really too many interceptions so far this year. And Howell, while he did show upside in the rushing game in the past, only 17 yards per game on the season for Howell. But 250 passing yards, and he's got a decent amount of weapons, but a really low implied team total this week of 18.5, 6.5 point dogs at home here. Not too excited about it. They have Russell Wilson against the Chiefs once again, which last time we played the Chiefs, obviously it was a bit of a disaster of a game. It wasn't great. He did get that late touchdown versus Courtland Sutton, which at least salvaged a little bit, but it was still a terrible outing. The weather was pretty poor for that one, high winds, which did hurt the long ball. Hopefully that's not the case once again. It's a little bit too early in the week for me to care about weather. But hopefully we're not even considering Russell in the first place anyway. But with that being said, that's all I got for today's video. I hope you did enjoy. If you did, make sure you leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, leave them down below. More than happy to answer them. I'll have my running back and wide receiver rankings out pretty soon. I wish you all the best of luck, and I'll see you all next time.